Welcome back to Midnight Pasta. Tonight's tale may follow you into your dreams. Subscribe if you haven't already. It helps keep the lights off and the chills on. I'd found the train station by accident, or at least, that's what I keep telling myself. It had been a long day of wandering through the woods. My camera slung over my shoulder and the sunlight had begun to fade, casting the trees in long twisted shadows. The map I'd been following had led me to a dead end. Nothing but thick brush and crumbling roads that seemed to go nowhere. But, as the dusk settled around me, I saw it. A faded sign half hidden by vines, rusted and peeling. It said simply, Harrowsdale Station. I'd never heard of Harrowsdale before. There was no mention of it on the map, and as far as I knew, no town by that name existed within 100 miles. Still, my curiosity outweighed my hesitation. The woods were quiet, too quiet, and I felt the urge to find something, anything, that could break the silence. The station was old, older than I expected, though it was difficult to say exactly how old. It had the air of something that had been forgotten and left to decay. The wood of the platform was cracked, the paint on the walls peeling like sunburnt skin, and the roof sagged in places. A rusted train car sat on the tracks, unmoving, as though it had simply stopped there, never to leave again. The track stretched out into the darkening woods, disappearing into the I walked toward the station with slow, hesitant steps, my boots crunching against the gravel. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. No birds, no animals, no sounds of civilization, just the faint hum of the wind as it swept through the trees. I didn't plan to stay long. I simply wanted a few photos before heading back to my car, which I had parked some miles away at the entrance of the woods. But as I stood there, the place began to feel different. Not just old, but heavy, like it had been waiting for something. I set my camera on a nearby post, trying to capture the entire platform in one shot. The lens clicked as I adjusted the settings, but as I pulled the camera away from my face, I froze. The train car, once still and lifeless, was now moving. It was so slight that I wasn't sure at first if I had imagined it, but the longer I stood there, the more certain I became. The train car was rocking back and forth, as though gently nudged by some unseen force. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A door on the far side of the platform, half-boat. It was the only door that wasn't sealed with rust and decay. The hinges groaned softly in the wind as if protesting the intrusion, but the door remained open, inviting me inside. I shouldn't have gone in, I knew that, but I couldn't resist. There was something in the air that made the decision feel inevitable. I stepped inside. The interior of the station was just as forgotten as its exterior. Dust hung thick in the air, and the floor creaked under my weight. Old wooden benches lined the walls, but there were no signs of any recent use. No litter, no empty cups, nothing to suggest that anyone had been here in years. The smell hit me next. Stale air, like something had been closed up for decades. A bitter tang of rust mingled with a faint scent of old newspapers and something else I couldn't quite place. As I ventured deeper into the station, my footsteps echoing unnervingly loud in the silence, I noticed something else. A flickering light at the far end of the platform, just beyond a set of broken windows. The bulb buzzed erratically, like it was struggling to stay alive. I watched it for a moment, transfixed by its erratic flickers, and then, as if responding to some unspoken command, the light steadied. A train whistle blew. I turned sharply, my heart leaping in my chest, but there was nothing. The tracks were empty, the platform deserted. The whistle had been distant, almost faint, as though it came from far off in the woods, or perhaps from beyond time itself. I felt my skin prickle with unease. A distant, rumbling vibration pulsed through the ground beneath my feet. I looked down, expecting to see the platform itself shaking, but everything was still. Yet, the air felt charged, as though something just out of sight was moving. Something not quite human. I turned back to the train car. It hadn't moved, not really, but the door was now completely open. I hadn't seen it swing wide like that before. Was it the wind? Had someone else come inside while I wasn't paying attention? A strange impulse tugged at me, one I couldn't shake. I knew I should leave. I should turn around and walk out the door, back to the woods where I could return to the comfort of the known. But something called me deeper into the station. I walked toward the train car. Inside the car, the air was colder and the flickering lights cast long, wavering shadows along the walls. I could feel the weight of time pressing down on me as I stepped further in, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The train's interior was just as forgotten as the station itself. The seats were old, cracked leather, the windows were filthy, and the air smelled of mildew. It was as though nothing had changed since the last passenger had stepped off, and that last passenger had never returned. As I moved down the aisle, I noticed something strange, a faint sound, like whispering. It was soft, almost inaudible, but it was there, low murmurs that seemed to echo in the corners of the train car. I turned toward the source of the sound, my pulse quickening. There was no one there. But the whispers didn't stop. I pressed my hand to my ear, trying to catch the words, but the murmurs were just out of reach, slipping away whenever I tried to focus. They felt familiar though, like I had heard them before, in a dream, or maybe even a nightmare. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, casting everything in an unnatural stuttering light. I heard something scrape along the floor, sharp and metallic, and I spun around to face the aisle. The shadows shifted. I don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't human. A shape, too tall to be anyone I could recognize, moved from one end of the train car to the other, barely perceptible, as though it was blending with the shadows themselves. I couldn't make out any features, only a silhouette, stretching unnaturally long and thin. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. My hand fumbled for my camera, but the lens was fogged over, the screen black as though it refused to work. I erased it anyway, snapping photos into the dark, hoping for something, anything, to prove I wasn't imagining it. The train car jerked. The train jolted again, this time harder, like something had slammed into the side of the car. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the nearest seat for balance. For a moment, everything was still. Too still. The whispers were gone. The shadows had retreated into the corners, leaving nothing but the faint hum of old machinery and the distant echo of something, no, someone, moving on the tracks. Then the voice came. It wasn't human, not exactly. It was low, guttural, as if something ancient was speaking directly to me, a language I couldn't understand but somehow felt deep inside me. Time does not wait, time does not forget. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. My camera, still in my hand, suddenly flared to life, its screen blurring with static before settling into a clear image. A photo of the train taken just seconds ago appeared on the screen. The image was wrong. In the photo, the train was no longer empty. There were figures inside the car, too many to count. Shapes huddled in the darkness, faces hidden beneath shadow. They were looking at me, and I swear I saw one of them smile. I turned to run. I don't remember how I made it out of the train car. The next thing I recall is stumbling onto the platform, my legs shaking beneath me. The train car, the station. It all seemed to be fading into the background, as though I was waking from a bad dream. I ran toward the exit, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But when I reached the door, it slammed shut in front of me with an awful finality. I yanked at the handle, my palms slick with sweat, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew thick with a static hum, and the once distant whistle of the train sounded again, closer this time, almost right behind me. I turned around. The train was there, parked on the tracks, its lights glowing faintly in the night. I could see the shadows moving inside again, more this time, pressing up against the windows. I couldn't see their faces, but I felt them, watching me, waiting for me to return. I backed away, But as I did, I noticed something chilling. The tracks. The platform, the entire station, was still in perfect condition, as though it had never been abandoned. It was as if the years had been erased, as if the station was still waiting for the next passenger to step onto its decaying platform. And then I heard the voice again, soft and steady, right behind me. "The train never leaves." I ran, but when I looked back, the station was gone. The tracks were empty. The trees surrounded me in the same oppressive silence, as though nothing had ever been there at all. And that's when I knew the truth. The station had never waited for me. I had waited for it. I didn't stop running. My feet pounded against the earth and my lungs burned with the effort, but it didn't matter. The woods seemed endless, and the deeper I went, the more everything felt wrong. The trees weren't just trees. They were like watching eyes, shadows that twisted unnaturally with every turn I made. I couldn't shake the feeling that the station, the train, the whispers, they were all closing in on me. I finally broke through the trees, stumbling onto the gravel path that led back to where I had parked my car. The headlights of the vehicle flickered dimly in the distance, barely visible in the twilight. I ran faster, the gravel cutting into my shoes. But as I neared the car, a strange sensation washed over me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I stopped short just before I reached the door. It wasn't the car that gave me pause. It was what I saw in the reflection of the side mirror. The train station. In the mirror, the tracks stretched out far behind me, fading into the distance like they had before, as though time itself was beginning to fold. The station was there, standing tall and intact, the rusted sign swaying slightly in the wind. There was no mistaking it. It wasn't a hallucination. I turned slowly, half expecting the station to be behind me, but there was nothing. Just the forest, dark and unyielding, with no sign of the place I had just escaped from. I blinked. It was gone. For a brief moment, I thought I might be losing my mind. My heart raced and I grabbed the car door handle, wrenching it open and throwing myself into the driver's seat. I fumbled for my keys, nearly dropping them in my panic. The engine roared to life with a grating sputter, and I sped down the dirt road, the tires kicking up dust in my wake. Haley, I didn't look back. The darkness swallowed me whole, and for the first time in hours, I felt a small measure of relief. But it wasn't over. The drive back to my apartment was uneventful, if you could call it that. I was exhausted, too shaken to think clearly, and when I finally pulled into my parking spot, I just sat there for a moment, staring blankly out the window. My hands were shaking, and my mind wouldn't stop racing. I tried to tell myself that I had imagined the whole thing, that it was just a trick of the light, an isolated incident, some weird part of my brain messing with me. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that the station was still out there, that the train was still waiting. It wasn't something I could outrun. I took my camera out of the bag, hoping the photos I'd taken would help ground me, offer some explanation for what I'd experienced. I flipped through the pictures, one by one, trying to make sense of the blurry images. The more I looked, the more I realized that the pictures weren't quite right. The first few were standard, shots of the platform, the old sign, the rusting train car. But as I scrolled deeper into the folder, my stomach twisted. In one photo, the train car was far off in the distance, but something was off with the way the tracks curved. They didn't follow the natural slope of the ground, as if they were drawn with no regard for geography. In another, I saw a figure standing in the train doorway, its face hidden in the shadows, but the shape? Something about the proportions, the unnatural stillness of it, sent a cold shiver down my spine. I hadn't seen anyone when I was standing on the platform. At least, I didn't think I had. But the final picture, that one made my blood run cold. It was a close-up shot of the interior of the train car. The lights were off, but in the dim light filtering through the windows, I could see the reflection of someone standing just behind the glass. A face, pale and gaunt, with eyes that stared directly into the camera. The figure wasn't outside the train. It was in the car, right there, standing motionless, watching me. I hadn't seen them when I was standing there, but they had been there. The photograph blurred for a moment as my hand shook uncontrollably, and I slammed the camera down onto the table. I felt my heart thumping against my ribs, a cold sweat dripping down the back of my neck. I needed to stop, to breathe, but the more I tried to calm myself, the stronger the compulsion grew. Lyra, I had to go back. I don't know why I went back. Part of me wished I hadn't, but the draw, the need to understand, had grown too powerful. It wasn't even just curiosity anymore. It was like I was being pulled toward the station, like I was destined to return, to finish something that had been left undone. I drove back to the woods, the same path I had taken earlier. This time, the air was colder, and the sky was a thick, oppressive gray. The world felt muted, as if everything around me was holding its breath. When I reached the spot where I had parked earlier, I noticed something different. The trees around the clearing were denser now, more twisted, as though they were leaning in on the path. And there, in the distance, was the station. It stood at the edge of the woods, as it had before, but this time it looked different. The roof was darker, the windows more opaque, as though it had aged a century in the hours I'd been gone. The station was waiting for me. I didn't want to go inside. I told myself it was too late. It was madness. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't leave until I found out what it wanted from me. I stepped onto the platform, and the door to the train car swung open before I even reached it, as if inviting me in. I hesitated for only a moment. As I stepped onto the train, I could feel it. Something had changed. The air was thick now, vibrating with some unseen energy. The lights flickered, and I could hear whispers again. Low, urgent, almost pleading. "It is time." I turned, the hairs on my neck standing on end. And there, standing in the aisle, was the same figure from the photograph. It was waiting for me. The figure stepped forward, its face still hidden in the shadows, but now I could see more of it. A tall, skeletal shape, gaunt and unnatural. Its limbs were too long, too thin, like it had been stretched beyond its natural proportions. It reached out a hand. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel something shifting around me. The train began to move, the wheels screeching as the car jerked into motion, the world outside the windows blurring into a wash of darkness. The figure took another step forward, and I instinctively took a step back. "You cannot leave," it rasped, its voice a rasping hiss, like dry paper tearing in the wind. I reached for my camera, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold it properly. The lens snapped forward, and I took a picture without thinking. The flash lit up the car, and for a brief, terrible moment, I saw the figure's face. It was smiling. They didn't have time to react. The lights flickered out, plunging the train into darkness. The whispers stopped. The train shuddered violently, and then, just as quickly as it had started, it came to a halt. The doors to the train car opened, the same door I had entered through. But when I stepped out, it wasn't the station I had come from. It was older, darker, wrong. I tried again, another station, then another, each one emptier, each one colder. And somewhere beneath it all, something was following me, and I was still waiting. That wraps up tonight's pasta. If your lights flicker, don't blame the wiring until the next shadow creeps in. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It helps more than you know. And if you liked the story, don't forget to hit the like button. In the comments below, share your own horror experience. I'll be reading after midnight. Good night. See you again tomorrow.